Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods. No grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, the network drama The Resident takes on type 1 diabetes and gets it right. I was able to speak with the co-executive producer, Andrew Chapman, on why this issue and why now.
One of the things that I was very aware of was the skyrocketing cost of insulin. And we also had not dealt with diabetes at all in the first season, and I was a writer on the show in the first season. And I just really wanted to have a diabetes episode.
Andrew lives with diabetes, as do two other writers on the staff. We'll talk about that, how this episode came together, no spoilers, and some behind-the-scenes info about working in television. Plus, what researchers are learning about OpenAPS, the do-it-yourself closed loop, from Twitter conversations. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. Programming note, we are out early this week because we're focusing on a TV show that's coming out the day before we normally release the podcast. I thought it was worth changing our regularly scheduled release date. Back to normal. Tuesdays, as always, Tuesdays next week. I hope I didn't throw anybody off with this, and if you're listening after the episode has aired, of course that is fine too. And if you're new to the show, welcome. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection, talking to the healthcare companies and the technology folks, trying to make things better and move things along. Also speaking to celebrities, movers and shakers, athletes and artists in our community, and everyday people just living with type 1 diabetes. My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2 back in 2006. My husband has type 2 diabetes. I have a background in broadcasting, local radio and television news. I don't have diabetes. And you put that all together and you get the podcast. A lot going on in the show this week. I'm also going to talk about my son is on an overnight field trip from school. That is a little bit later this week as you listen, but I'll put more of that at the end of the show. I know you want to hear from Andrew Chapman and more about The Resident. But just for parents, I love to share stories of when Benny's doing something that is testing his independence, and this certainly is one of those. Well, you know, we've all seen TV and movies get diabetes wrong. So when a show gets it right, and as well as taking a stand on healthcare policy, it makes you sit up and take notice. And that is what's going on with The Resident, back for its second season on Fox. And the episode that airs Monday of this week features a strong plot line about diabetes. Now, we found out about this because it was released on Hulu, the streaming service, first, a couple of days back, kind of a sneak peek. And then word got out. People were talking about it on social media. I reached out to the show's creator, Amy Holden Jones. She's on Twitter. She put me in touch with Andrew Chapman, who is not. We will talk to him in just a moment about how this episode came to be. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And when you have a toddler diagnosed with type 1, you hear rumblings for a long time about the teen years. And if you're like me, you think, oh, it won't affect my son. It will be fine. But it hit us at full force a little early. And I'm so glad we had Dexcom. Benny's insulin needs started going way up around age 11. I mean, he is now a size 13 shoe, I want to say. And the hormone swings, it's crazy. And I can't imagine managing diabetes without the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system. You know, you can react more quickly to highs and lows, see the trends, adjust insulin doses with advice from our endocrinologist. And I know the Dexcom G6 now is helping to improve Benny's A1C and his overall health. We've been with Dexcom now using this for almost 5 years, and it just keeps getting better. For more information, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo.
Not everyone is insured.
It's not our problem.
Something is wrong.
This is a business. It's not a charity.
So it's money or your life?
You have to learn to work together.
They missed each other.
things will be different.
I'm not watching a lot of TV these days. I love TV. I'm not one of those people who's, I don't like TV. I love it. But life is nuts. We're really busy. So it's just a little bit at the end of the day before I fall asleep with it on. But I realized I caught the end of The Resident last week on Fox. And I'll tell you, it looked like everybody who works at the hospital was getting fired. So I was going to tune in this week to see what happens anyway. And now, of course, I have to. My guest this week is the co-executive producer and one of the writers on the Fox hit show. Andrew Chapman, as you'll hear, is also one of 3 people with diabetes on the writing staff of that show. He was diagnosed with LADA, Latent Autoimmune Diabetes in adults, also known as type 1.5, about 8 years ago. Now, of course, this is not a show that always revolves around diabetes. If you've never seen it, it is a medical drama with very good-looking people, which focuses not just on the illness of the week, but also the issues behind healthcare, the bureaucracy of it all. Andrew is also a novelist. He's written for film. He's got a play coming out later this year. More on that after the interview. But now, here's my talk with Andrew Chapman about the diabetes-centered episode of The Resident. Andrew, thanks for joining me. We were so interested to see this episode. I appreciate you jumping on to tell us more about it.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. Anything to get the word out about diabetes.
So how did this all come about? Obviously, The Resident is a show that takes place in the hospital. You talk about healthcare. Your show focuses on issues other than just medicine. I mean, you talk about bureaucracy and things like that a lot. But how did this come up to focus on the issue of not just type 1, but the costs involved?
So we really pride ourselves in the way we are different from other medical shows like Grey's Anatomy or The Good Doctor. We really take on issues in American healthcare. And for me personally, as a writer on the show and as someone who's responsible for coming up with ideas for episodes, I always try to look at, what are the character issues for our various characters in the show, but also like, what are big issues in healthcare today in America? What are the things that are problematic or good, but mostly problematic because that's good for drama in American healthcare? And one of the things, as a diabetic, one of the things that I was very aware of was the skyrocketing cost of insulin. And we also had not dealt with diabetes at all in the first season, and I was a writer on the show in the first season. And I just really wanted to have a diabetes episode. And the other thing that I really care about, and just so you know, I come at this from the perspective of a universal healthcare kind of guy, for what it's worth, good and bad. I think ultimately that's where we're going in the United States. So one of the other issues that was really important to me was the difference in people's care when they are rich and when they are poor. And there is overwhelming statistical evidence that poor people get different levels of care than rich people get. And it's not even that they get different levels of care because they get different doctors. They get different levels of care from the same doctors. So combining those two issues, diabetes and levels of care, that was dear to my heart. I mean, I really wanted to do it. And Amy Holden-Jones, who's the creator of the show, who I co-wrote this episode with, was completely on board. She's very much an issues person as well. So we approach story, and episodes and how we're going to break the story in each episode in a similar way. So we knew about the skyrocketing price of insulin because I am diabetic, but also because we have ER doctors on staff and all kinds of doctors who come in and talk to us about these things all the time. And this was an issue. And people were like, this is crazy. We can't believe that, insulin prices are going through the roof.
Well, and that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about, is the reaction you got from the people around you, because I want to talk more about how TV writing operates, but I have this vision in my head of you, there's a writer's room and people are sitting around pitching ideas, and you bring this up and people kind of saying, it's not a big deal. Were people that surprised to find out about not only the price of insulin, but I'm sure you talked more about what actually goes on with diabetes?
Well, first of all, we have 3 diabetics on staff. So it's not just myself. I'm a 1.5. We have a type 2, and we have a type 1 who's been that way since he was 4, who pumps.
You got everybody represented.
Yeah, no, we got the full spectrum. So, there was no, like, diabetes is something that comes up over lunch every day because we eat differently than everybody else, and we talk about it, and, are you going to the gym, and what's your number, and how's your A1C? Like, it's a topic of conversation. So there was no pushback within the staff, and in fact, there's almost never pushback on an issue within the staff because we're all primed. We research the hell out of every topic in medicine, and we have doctors coming and going all the time talking to us about costs and treatment problems and the corruption within various forms, various systems in the medical world. I mean, we're ready to pounce on an issue right away. So no, there was no pushback at all. On the contrary, there's support.
That's fantastic to hear. So the episode we're talking about, I don't know how much you want to give away because this podcast episode will go live right before the show does. But then people will listen to it after your episode airs. But in a nutshell, without, I don't know if spoilers are even indicated here, can you explain a little bit about the plot and what does end up happening here, as much as you can?
Sure. I mean, I won't give away the ending, but I will say that the idea is that there are two young patients who come into the hospital, and one of them has an accident and requires surgery, and through various machinations eventually has to have his pancreas removed, and he will be a long-term diabetic. And the other patient comes in as a diabetic right off the bat and is uninsured and is rationing insulin. And so she comes in trying to find insulin in the hospital and is having trouble getting to it. I won't tell you what happens to either of them. It's a life or death thing for both patients, but basically it's the one who comes in with the surgery comes from a wealthy family, and the one who comes in rationing insulin often obviously as uninsured and not wealthy. And so we play the two sort of stories simultaneously and where it goes and what happens.
So this clip came out a couple of days ago, and the reaction on social media was swift and strong. I mean, that's how I saw it, was people in the diabetes community tweeting this and saying things like, oh my gosh, it looks like they got it right. Thank you, staff of the resident, for showing what can happen and really getting the language of type 1 correctly. Obviously, now we know why. Because not only do three people on staff live with it, but you also do your research. So I would assume that other conditions are well represented as well. But was there a little bit? Oh yeah, no, sorry to interrupt. Every episode, whenever we take on an issue, we go directly to the doctors or the healthcare professionals to tell us, how does that work? What are the problems? Are we getting it right? And we don't always get it right. Sometimes we mess up, but we really try hard to hit this stuff correctly. Were you surprised when you saw that reaction or heard about it from other people with the show? Because it really has been tweeted and retweeted a bunch of times now. No, I mean, I think that the world, diabetes is epidemic, and it's epidemic type 2, it's epidemic type 1, and it's it's criminal that there are people out there who are type 1 diabetics who cannot pay for insulin. It's crazy. It makes me insane. Works me up to the point of tears where I'm like, how can this be? How can we be the major industrialized nation in the world and still have people who can't afford this life-saving thing that isn't even just life-saving, it's basic functioning of their immune and endocrinology system. I have no words to express my outrage at that. So to me, yeah, people should be tweeting like crazy and people should be all over this all the time. The timing here in terms of this show is interesting too, because we just put out an episode last week with Nicole Smith Holt, whose son Alex Smith died in 2017 because he was rationing insulin. And that coincided with, there is a protest this weekend at Eli Lilly. So there really is more education and more awareness of this issue, I think, among people who felt that, well, there's something wrong if you can't get your insulin covered. And that could never happen to me. I think people are realizing now that it's much more of an issue with the price increases than it has been. So the timing here is interesting as I talk to you. What do you hope comes out of this episode? I know that not everybody who writes for TV thinks they're going to change the world, but we have seen TV episodes and TV plot lines influence how people think. What do you hope happens here? right back to Andrew in just a moment, and we will get his answer. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneTouch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The OneTouch VarioFlex meter seamlessly syncs with the free OneTouch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the OneTouch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, OneTouch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch VarioFlex meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. Now back to Andrew on Writing for the Resident and what effect he hopes the show will have on the healthcare conversation.
But first of all, the thing that shocks me isn't like a lack of support or people pushing back. What always shocks me about my own diabetes and when I talk to people about it or I explain it is how little people actually know. Like, that I have to explain that, well, this is how diabetes works, and this is what it means to be a type 1. This is what it means to be a type 2, and they don't get it. They it's in the periphery of their knowledge, but it's just not a core thing. Now, people who have it in the family even people who have it in the family don't necessarily know, but people who actually are affected by diabetes, yeah, they know. But I think if anything, just awareness, like an understanding that this happens, that it's serious, that it's, it can be simply a chronic thing that you manage through your life, but if it somehow gets out of control, or if you cannot afford the thing to manage it as a chronic illness, it'll kill you. And I guess that's what I'd like for people to understand and know. Can we affect the price of drugs? I don't know. I mean, that people are protesting in front of Eli Lilly, I think is fantastic. And, on a larger level, I think there's problems in American healthcare with drug pricing up and down the line.
Sure.
It's crazy that the price of insulin has tripled in very few number of years, and there have been no modifications to that drug to warrant the price increase. But there are also cancer drugs that cost $150,000 a dose, and those people are going to drop dead. And so, I think that's insane as well.
Let's talk about your experience with diabetes. As you mentioned, you have 1.5. Some people call that LADA. It is a newer diagnosis of diabetes, something that is often misdiagnosed as type 2. Tell us about how you found out that you have that. You've lived with it for about 7-8 years now.
Yes. So I'm a middle-aged man. I got it in my mid-40s. And, I had the classic experience. I was on vacation with my family in New Orleans, and I was eating and drinking like a pig, and
well, it's New Orleans. Wait a minute. You can't be too critical.
Exactly. It was what I was supposed to. And I was carbing out, and I was incredibly thirsty. I could not figure out why I was so thirsty. And, of course, I'm a guy that's like, it's not a big deal. I'm just thirsty. And of course, it was my diabetes coming to the fore. When I flew home, I thought I had the flu, and I stepped on the scale and I'd lost 10 pounds, and I am not somebody who can afford to lose 10 pounds right off the bat. I'm pretty skinny to begin with. So I went to the doctor, and they misdiagnosed me. They looked at me and they go, well, you don't seem like a type 2, but you seem to exhibit the symptoms of a diabetic. So we'll take your blood test and we'll see. And they didn't do a finger prick. They did a full blood panel and sent it into the lab. And, of course, that took overnight, and I got a phone call at about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I was fast asleep, and the doctor was on call and had obviously gotten my results in the middle of the night and was alarmed. And she said, the very first thing she said, is this Andrew Chapman? And I said, yeah. She goes, are you conscious?
Oh, my gosh.
I was like, I was asleep, but I'm conscious now. You woke me up. And I said, hello, exactly. She said, you need to go to the ER right now. Your blood sugar is 550. And I was like, what? I had no clue. I didn't know what it was. I just was baffled. And she said, this is what you have. You're a diabetic. Welcome to a brand new world. It's, 1 o'clock in the morning. And, you should go to the ER. And I didn't feel bad. So I was like, really? I have to go to the ER at 1 o'clock in the morning? Can I just go see my doctor in the morning? She's like, yeah, if you're okay, you seem like you can. Of course, I didn't sleep that night. I just spent the night weeping. And in the morning, what was interesting for, I hope your listeners find this interesting. I went into my doctor, and it was a Friday, and they said, well, congratulations, you're diabetic. We're going to give you insulin, and here is a small dose to keep you going through the weekend and needles. But we need to set you up with a diabetic nurse who's going to show you how to do all this. And I was like, okay, send me. And they called her, and she wasn't available till Monday.
Oh, my God.
And they said, you know what, we're going to take away your insulin. We're going to take away the needles. Just wait till Monday and deal with it then. And I was like, but my number's so high. And they said, just cut carbs out of your diet for the weekend, exercise a lot, see how it goes. And I did. And then when I did that and I cut carbs entirely out of my diet and I exercised like a lunatic, because I am disciplined beyond, I'm crazy disciplined. When I got to the diabetic nurse, she did a finger prick and she's like, oh, your sugar's 130. You've dropped it 400 points over the weekend.
Because you were scared.
I was scared. And so she said, I'm not going to give you insulin. I'm just going to I think you should go back to your endocrinologist. You should find an endocrinologist and see what they say.
Okay.
So don't go to insulin. And in fact, she was right. And so I'm not insulin dependent. I take metformin, but I just keep my carb low and I exercise like a crazy person. And that's my life. And it's I have no other time for anything else. So I'm not sure what kind of a life it is, but it's what I do.
But they say that you have type 1.5, that you don't have type 2, that eventually you're probably going to switch over to more of a type 1 regimen. I'm creeping towards insulin dependence as a type 1. I mean, I have a small number of beta cells that keep I produce a small amount of insulin. I sort of live in a weird gray zone of keeping it at bay, but not perfect. And as you listen, I'm going to put some links in the show notes about LADA, about type 1.5, because I know as you're listening, some of you are saying, if he's on metformin, he's type 2. It's not. This is a real thing. There's several people we've talked to in the past who have it. I'll link up a past episode where we delve into it and explain it more. But if you're not as disciplined as Andrew is, then I'm sure that most people with LADA go on insulin sooner. But it's funny, Andrew, we had the same experience. My son was sick for a while. We didn't know what was going on. I won't retell the whole story again. But the day that they said, oh, my gosh, your son needs to go to the hospital right now, his blood sugar is dangerously high, he was feeling fine that day. And he was playing. It was like a good day. I was like, are you sure we have to go right now? But with young children, they don't fool around. We went to the hospital. We were there for 3 days. And he was full-blown type 1. But it's funny when you get these messages or you talk to people and you're like, yeah, I was feeling fine. Or my blood sugar was 130 when I saw the educator. Diabetes is a crazy thing.
Also, in terms of I do take metformin, and I have this conversation with my endocrinologist, who's wonderful. I have this conversation with him every 6 months with his, do I really need this metformin? He's like, do you really need it? Maybe, maybe not. It's hard to tell. Diabetes is mysterious, but it's prophylactic at this point, and it's not going to hurt you. So let's just keep it going. And in fact, at some point, he may just up the dosage to sort of facilitate what little insulin I have left in my body, its ability to keep my blood sugar down.
You and your endo will know when it all craps out. I don't mean to make light of it, but you will all know.
No. What else do we have except to make light of it? Right?
Yes. Humor is huge.
Jokes are what we've got.
So let's talk about your writing career, if you don't mind. Because, in addition to television and movies, you write novels. You're a prolific writer for many years here. How did you get started in all this? Was this always what you wanted to do?
Yeah, weirdly, that's besides become a professional basketball player, which sort of crapped out a long time ago. All I've ever wanted to do is be a writer, practically from elementary school. That's all I've ever wanted to do. So I've done it in one shape or another my entire life. I was briefly a journalist, college, and then after, and then I started in on screenwriting, and moved to LA and got production jobs. I did all kinds of production work. Like I was a location scout, I was an assistant director, but always to feed my habit of writing. And eventually I sold some screenplays for features, and I worked in features for a good number of years. I was the original writer on Pocahontas for Disney. I did an original draft of Iron Man, which never saw the light of day. They totally rewrote me. I did rewrites on a number of things. The Beethoven movies, I did some. And then the sort of business fell apart for features. They never really develop features anymore. And I was looking sort of couldn't get arrested as a writer. And so I knew people who were working in television, and I was like, television, I should try that. Maybe I can make a living doing television. And so I started doing TV. And, I've worked on a bunch of TV shows, and I developed my own shows. None of them have actually seen the light of day, but, you get paid to do it, and that's good. And then I sort of split up my time working on other people's shows or trying to develop my own shows. I've show-run stuff, and then in between I write novels, spy thrillers mostly.
Yeah, and you write for television, and correct me if I'm wrong, you write for TV and movies under Andrew Chapman, but your books are Drew Chapman.
Yeah, because my publisher, Simon & Schuster, there is an Andrew Chapman out there who writes, he's a science fiction novelist, I think. He's Australian or something. I'm not even really sure. But because he came first, if you go to Amazon and type in Andrew Chapman, you get his books, not mine. So my publisher was like, no way is that going to happen. You have to change your name. And I didn't, like, some people call me Drew. So I was like, okay, Drew, I can. It's sort of like more masculine and tough, too. I was like, oh, yeah, Drew. That's kind of badass, right?
How do you go back and forth? Writing for television is so different, or maybe it's not. I don't know, but it would seem that it's so different than writing novels.
It is different. It's not actually I don't have a problem, the format or the writing. I actually enjoy going back and forth. The problem is more one of time. Television requires so much intense effort over these bursts, and then a novel, you can't, it's hard to just write a novel for an hour or two, like at night. I need like big chunks of time to really think about it and sort of figure it out. So for me, it's more a matter of, can I, find the time to actually write a novel and have the ideas to write a novel and still write television. Television pays better considerably. It also, going back to the issue of diabetes and healthcare, the Writers Guild has just fabulous health insurance. Like, it's almost the best thing about it. So we have absolute Cadillac platinum healthcare that we pay nothing for.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And so in the world of diabetes, I'm blessed. Like, it couldn't be better. But it does make me aware of all the people who don't have.
Sure.
And what a problem that is.
Let me ask you a couple of inside baseball things, if you don't mind, about writing for television. And one of those is, with The Resident, you are a co-executive producer and a writer. Is that typical? Are there a lot of people who go back and forth between writing and producing?
So every TV writer above a certain level is a producer. You have to be a producer. Television is run on the backs of writers. We make it happen. Nobody else can pump out so many scripts. And so what we also do is, once we've written the script, we have to go produce that episode. We have to show up on set, sit there, babysit everything, make sure everything runs well, and help out. So all those people that you see on the front end of a television show, when you see the credits that says producer, co-producer, co-executive producer, executive producer, those people in general are all writers, but with different titles. And those titles often have to do with how much they get paid, honestly. It's like it's almost like code for their salary.
Oh, got it.
But we're all producers. If you're a staff writer or a story editor, which are the sort of what we call baby writers who are just starting out, they tend not to be producers. They just are writing, and they'll still show up on set, but they're not really producing. They're sort of learning as they go.
It's so interesting because, I went to school for broadcasting, and I went to school with a lot of guys and women who majored in television, radio, and film, and have since made careers out in the TV industry. But I think for most of us who are just viewers, we have no idea. It's as, you mentioned like all the shows that you've worked on and been paid for that don't see the light of day. I'm always shocked when I see how many, you hear about all these pilots that are produced and never catch, or how many actors and actresses have appeared in things that never come out. It's such an interesting business that we don't know anything about. So I hope you don't mind me asking you those kinds of questions.
Not at all. I think of pilots that don't get produced or pilots that get produced but never go to series as it's a little bit like research and development. It's like a drug company coming up with a drug that never goes to market. It's like you got to try, 10, 20, 30, 100 different things before one makes sense to spend, so much money on. Fox is ballpark going to spend $100 million on this season of The Resident, just production, advertising, everything. That's a huge investment. So you're going to spend some fraction of that trying to figure out what are the other shows that I want to do and what's going to work.
Do you have time to work on any other shows when you're doing something like this?
You have time to develop. So what you do is you come up with ideas and you try to sell them to other networks or the same network as an idea to write as your own show. But you don't have a lot of time. It's small.
Got it. Okay, so back to the Resident in this episode with Type 1 being the focus. Do you have any television or movie moments that you can recall where you cannot believe what a bad job they did with diabetes? Anything that you said to your fellow writers, do not do this?
Interesting.
That's okay if you don't.
I don't really, because I feel like diabetes as a issue, like people don't take it that they don't take it that seriously. And part of it is, I think there's a real prejudice against, I know your audience is mostly Type 1s, but Type 2s, I think there's a blame the victim mentality in Type 2 diabetes where, it's a lifestyle thing. And it's like, that's just unfair and brutal. And I think that is a constant in, our culture. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the idea of diabetes, given that it's epidemic in both 1 and Type 2, is underrepresented. Like any representation would be good.
Well, but I could give you a list. I mean, which makes me laugh because whenever I see diabetes in a movie or a TV show, immediately that person is going to be in peril. There's going to be some mortal danger by something that their insulin, and they're going to get it wrong. So I have about 10 shows I could rattle off, but I don't need to do that because it's so funny. Every once in a while, a show will come on or a book will come through, and the main character has Type 1, but they're just living their life, and that's amazing to me. When you meet someone with diabetes who just is going on with business.
Absolutely, and that, that's what I strive for in my writing. I did write a pilot where main character had Type 2. It did not see broadcast, but it was about what I would like to do is the normalization of living your life with this chronic disease and how you go about it. Obviously, in The Resident, we went for the dramatic where they're trying to live their life, but they're rationing insulin. And that was our plot point. But just regular old, how do I get through my day? That's also interesting to me.
So again, not giving away the ending of the episode that we're talking about, is there any chance of revisiting these characters, or do you think maybe we'll just wait and maybe have another episode that involves diabetes somewhere down the line here?
I think we will revisit either of potentially these stories just because diabetes is dear to my heart, and I feel like this is an issue that needs to be, sort of raised as much as possible, but also because what we do on The Resident is bring up issues, right? We bring up healthcare issues, and this issue is not going away. Like, diabetes and the cost of insulin, it's only getting worse. And we need to, be out there on the front lines and really, just getting the word out. So, yes, I think we will come back to this.
Well, I really appreciate you jumping on with me. This was short notice, and it was so interesting to talk to you not only about the episode, but about the industry. Andrew, I hope you'll come back on and let us know what's next.
I would absolutely love to. Anytime. Just, you have my number.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Much more information about the show. The episode, I believe, is called The Prince and the Pauper, which makes a lot of sense, the way Andrew described the plot of the show and those two different patients. I'll have more information as well about Andrew, his author page at Amazon. I guess I should say Drew, because he goes by Drew there. And I'm also linking up a play that he has written. I mentioned that at the beginning of the show. He has a play called 99 Tropes. It's coming out in November for a run in Seattle. So if you live anywhere near there, definitely look into the show notes and find out more. You can get the show notes at diabetes-connections.com every week, every episode. And please make sure to go through them because I do put lots of information for each episode. If you're listening on a podcast player and a podcast app, like Stitcher or Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. The show notes are there. If you're listening on social media, it's a little bit more difficult to put those notes into social media posts. So go ahead, head over to the page or head on over to the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. You know, I asked Andrew about the bad TV stuff, and he was kind of like, well, I don't know about that. I think some of that might have been professional courtesy, because you and I know there is so much garbage out there about type 1 diabetes, and I can just list it off, no problem. You know, the episode of Two Broke Girls, where he was going into insulin shock, which was actually a low blood sugar, but then they gave him an insulin injection to bring him out of it. You know, there's the movies, Con Air has a terrible, that is a bananas movie anyway, but that has a terrible scene of diabetic shock. You know, you need a shot. Hannah Montana, way back when, there was a really bad episode of Hannah Montana. I could go on and on. I did a game show over the summer, and that was one of the categories, you know, TV and movie plots gone wrong, and Law and Order, The Blacklist, The Flash, there's all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to link that up. Actually, there's a great article from Beyond Type 1 about when media gets it wrong. And I'll link up the game show episode too if you're interested in listening to that. We had a lot of fun with that one. But I was really thrilled that Andrew had time to come on very quickly, that they were very receptive to talking about this. Anything that keeps the conversation going. You don't have to agree with every single line of the politics that they put on the show, but I think it's great to keep the conversation going, and I really appreciate him coming on. In our Know Better segment this week, a study about OpenAPS technology by looking at Twitter chatter. Know Better is brought to you by Know Better Foods. At No Foods, they say good is never good enough, and they want us to eat better, feel better, and be better. And when I say no grain, no gluten, no guilt, I mean, that's for real. There's no grain, there's no gluten, there's no wheat, soy, or dairy in these products. And if you try to eat gluten-free or, you know, keto-friendly, you know how hard it is to find bready foods that taste good and feel good. And that's why I love No Foods, because the waffles, the buns, the breadcrumbs, they taste like real food. It's not this gritty, weird, or mushy taste. I highly recommend them. The chocolate chips are really good too. That's a newer product. And the cookies come in a snack size, which gets a big thumbs up for me because I love the cookies, but they are kind of big. And then I always say I'm going to cut them in half, and then I always eat the whole thing. So thank you very much for helping me with portion control. Hey, you can always save at checkout. Just use the promo code Stacey10. Find out more, just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the No Foods logo. We have talked quite a bit in the past about open source artificial pancreas technology, OpenAPS, and I will link up previous interviews all about this subject. This next segment might not make any sense if you're not familiar with it, but I think most people know that this is an off-label technology that includes basic CGM, Dexcom CGM, and an older insulin pumps that are not currently manufactured. There are several Medtronic older insulin pumps that do not have the so-called safety feature, and I'm doing air quotes here because many people would prefer it not have that feature. Anyway, so basically it combines the Dexcom with the older pump, and it is there to really be a hybrid closed loop unto itself. For some, it's a totally closed loop. So researchers at the University of Utah Health wanted to understand more about the community's thoughts about the development, access, and adoption of OpenAPS. And they published this in a September issue of the Journal of Diabetes Science and Technology. I'm going to link up this article from newsmedical.net, but I'm going to read you just a little bit of it here. These researchers followed the OpenAPS hashtag on Twitter to understand how the community is talking about this option. They surveyed more than 3,000 tweets from January 2016 to January 2018. I'm going to have to go see if I tweeted in that time. And they found 5 themes. With OpenAPS, self-reported A1C and glucose variability improved. OpenAPS reduced the daily distress and burden associated with diabetes. OpenAPS is perceived as safe. Interactions with healthcare providers concerning APS. How to adapt OpenAPS technology for individual user needs. So those are the 5 top topics that they found. They say there may be social pressure here to compel participants to only post positive experiences with OpenAPS. And there's a lot of unknowns about the technology. But it was a really interesting write-up and a way to look at how we all talk about what's going on in our community. I don't know if you'll recall, but there was a study done on social media using Instagram about whether people wear their diabetes gear where we are, again, air quotes, supposed to. Because if you look at Instagram, most people are wearing the Dexcom on their arm. It is not FDA approved for use there. Many, many people wear the Libre in areas other than the arm, the only place it is approved for use. I'll link up that article as well because it's just fascinating to see how researchers are using social media to find out more about what the community is really doing. It's also a bit of a heads up to understand that what you post on social media, unless it's behind pretty strict privacy, is possibly being used in a public way. Now, I get around all of this because I've always thought two things about posting on social media. One, could it be printed on the front page of my local paper? I used to use it all the time when I worked in local media because I wanted to make sure I wasn't putting anything out there that could get me in trouble. And two, what if my mom sees it? Is it still okay? And you know why that's really easy now? Because my mom is on Twitter and Facebook. So I don't worry too much about what I post because she acts as a nice limiter for me. Again, I will post the links to this article and to the study at diabetes-connections.com and in the show notes as well. I thought that was pretty interesting, though, to see how university researchers were a little bit of eavesdropping on our community's conversations, hopefully to use in a way that can further study and better quality of life. And now you know better. If you're listening in Syracuse, New York, anywhere in central New York, I'm coming your way very soon, middle of October, going up to Syracuse University for a radio conclave, talking to students about podcasting at my alma mater. So I'm very excited to go back. It's always fun when you can revisit your college and do something useful at the same time. This is the first time that this particular conference has included podcasting, so I'm so excited to represent. I'm also going to be meeting with JDRF while I'm there, talking to their youth ambassadors, doing some media training. How cool is that? So if you're in the area, contact JDRF for all of the information. I'll link it up if they put an event out on the Facebook group as well. And if you'd like me to come to your area, we can get creative like that. That was their idea, to do media training for the ambassadors, which I really think is fun. And I'm going to pitch for, other chapters and talk to my groups here in Charlotte. But, if you'd like me to come and talk about podcasting, talk about the community, really, I do a lot of speaking about the diabetes community. I would be thrilled. Just let me know. And speaking of traveling, I mentioned at the top of the show that Benny is going to Washington, D.C. This is the 8th grade school trip, and we are not going. I have not gone on any field trips with my children. And, well, no, that's not true. I went to one field trip with Benny in 5th grade. Maybe it was 4th grade. It was to Old Salem here. And it was just a day trip. It was very fun. But I have never gone on field trips because of my preference. I worked full time for many, many years. So going on field trips was never practical. And by the time I changed everything up and started working from home, the kids were old enough that they really didn't have a lot of opportunities for parents to go, and they didn't want me around. So that's okay by me. In middle school, at least our middle school, parents don't go as chaperones anyway, and I have every confidence in this group of educators. Now, I want you to stay with me on this one. A school nurse does not go, has never gone on any of his overnight trips. And as I said, I don't go. I don't stay in a hotel room down the block. I'm not faulting you if you do. I think every kid is different. I think every parent is different. I think the way we manage is different. And there are definitely circumstances where kids with type 1 have other things going on. And so they need extra attention. They need extra help. Benny does not. And we've been through this enough where I know that we can troubleshoot from home. Years ago, gosh, it's 3 years already, when he went on the 5th grade trip, he had an inset change. He wasn't sure whether to change the inset, which he knew how to do. And he decided that he was going to give himself a shot rather than change out the inset. We weren't sure if it was working properly. And he had never done a shot all by himself. I mean, he had never done a shot not in our presence. He knew how to draw it up and how to give it and everything else. And a lot of kids who pump from a very early age have this problem because they never have to give themselves shots. So we really had to teach him how to do it, but he was nervous. Well, thank goodness for technology. We were able to FaceTime and talk him through it. And he did great. And that inset didn't need to be changed. It was just a high that he probably missed a bolus at dinner, and who knows what the heck they ate for dinner. So we have been able to manage from afar, and I anticipate the same thing happening here. Now, I'm very superstitious. If you're a longtime listener, you know I generally talk about things after they happen. But I have a lot of friends in the DC area in the diabetes community, so I'm crossing my fingers if anything comes up that we really need help with, that they can step in. But I had a great meeting with his principal and with the vice principal. We have a plan. The plan consists of, this time around, and it changes every year because Benny changes every year. The plan this time around is that I'm going to communicate with him twice a day, during breakfast or shortly thereafter, and before bedtime, to make sure all the gear is working, he feels comfortable, and numbers are okay. Of course, I'll still have the Dexcom follow, so I'll be able to see what's going on. I will contact the educators just to say all is well, checked in, things are good, and with anything else that they need to handle. They feel more comfortable carrying his bag, which I think is a little over the top, but I'm appreciative of it because who wants to go back to a museum when your doofus kiddo, and I'm referring to my doofus kiddo, leaves his diabetes bag there? I'm sure your child never forgets and is very responsible, but Benny is a great kid, but would lose his head. So they're going to carry his bag as they carry other medications, the EpiPens and stuff like that. And they're going to help me out that way. So that's our plan. And I'll let you know how it goes. I'll post in the Facebook group, but not really until the trip is over. I mentioned I'm pretty superstitious that way. So that's our plan. And that's what's going on right now. I have one more college visit with my daughter. Yeah, she's a high school senior. So we're doing that as well, kind of crossing the field trip. And then my husband has to step in, and there's lots of moving parts here, but there's a lot going on. Everybody is so busy this time of year. And that is it. We've got a lot coming up. Speaking of busy, October shows are lots of technology stuff coming up. And then November is Diabetes Awareness Month. Lot cooking. I mentioned last week something fun is coming. Definitely join the Facebook group or sign up for the newsletter so you'll be one of the first to know. And that'll do it. Thank you so much to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions, for all of his hard work here. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.